The 2023 Xfinity US Gymnastics National Championships will not only be used for the selection of the US men's national team, but will also serve as the final selection for the World Championships team in Antwerp, Belgium later this year, and the Pan American Games team in Santiago, Chile. Some of the scores that you're going to see at this event are going to be higher than you may expect, and that's because the U.S. has chosen to use a bonus system. And while the bonus system will not be used to select the World Championship team, it will be used to select both the national team and the Pan American Games team. Heading into the 2023 Xfinity US National Gymnastics Championship, there was a lot of focus on 19-year-olds Asher Hong and Fred Richard, but it was truly veteran Yul Moldauer who made the first impression of the night. He debuted a 6.6 start value at the 2022 Winter Cup, but he ended up downgrading the routine last year many times, but not this time. With new composition, Moldauer eased from a peach to a peach half and quickly demonstrated his mastery of the event, highlighted by his Falcon and his stuck double front half-out dismount. His score of 15.805 was only bested by Curran Phillips in the following rotation. Quickly to follow was another highlight of the night. Michigan's Fred Richard started his routine on high bar with a stunning Cassina and Coleman. Though his chest was a little bit low on the landing, his score of 15.105 would hold up as the top score throughout the rest of the competition. And based on his competition, you wouldn't know that just 20 minutes prior, he actually realized that he did not have his competition uniform. And thank you so much to Scott Bregman at the Olympic Channel for posting this story. But what we found out was that he usually only puts on his uniform in the sixth event during warm-up. And so he went to go look for it. He couldn't find it anywhere. So assistant coach Jordan Gerenstrom was dispatched to go find his uniform. And in the meantime, Richard and his teammate Javier Alfonso had concocted this plan that they would just switch off uniforms so that Fred would be able to compete. But luckily, Gerenstrom was able to find Fred's uniform and the competition was able to go on. Richard's other teammate, Paul Judah, is certainly one of those who is in contention for a return to the national team and an international assignment later this fall. But his night was really more of a night of redemption after a fall early on in his high bar routine on a pretty easy skill, a straddle to Kachev. He had a long way to go to work his way back up to the top of the all-around standings. And then on the absolute other side of the arena, Stanford gymnasts started on rings, and Asher Hong put up a massive 14.999. His routine had a 6.1 start value, which was the highest difficulty start value of the night. And his teammates Brandon Briones and Colt Walker also put up strong routines, and Stanford would end up having 3 of the top 6 ring scorers at the end of the night. So following the first rotation, Yul Moldauer was in first place, followed by Fred Richard and then Asher Hong. Heading into rotation 2, there were a couple key routines to keep an eye on, the most notable probably being Curran Phillips' parallel bar routine. And ahead of the competition, Phillips had told members of the media that he had planned on downgrading his routine by a 10th. So instead of doing a Diamondov half at the end of his routine, he was just going to do a Diamondov so that his routine would be more consistent. And it worked. Phillips scored a 16.147, which was the highest single score of any event of the competition. And while he is certainly capable of being world champion on this event, Phillips has struggled with consistency throughout this year. I was able to speak to high performance director Brett McClure, and McClure said that he has been encouraging athletes on the men's national team for some time to take control and accountability of their routines. And so Curran said that he called Brett earlier and said that he had decided to make this change so that he could earn a spot on the world's team. And so I think that this is just showing the development and camaraderie that is currently happening in the men's national team, where national team staff is encouraging athletes to make their own decisions, and the athletes themselves feel empowered that they can make their own decisions for what is best for them and their own goals. While this is going on, the Stanford cohort has moved from still rings to vault, and they certainly showed there why they are the reigning NCAA national champions. Asher Hong performed the most difficult vault of the night with a Ri Se Gwang, which is named after a North Korean Olympic champion. He got really good height on the vault, but he did have a little bit of problem with rotation and ended up needing to take a step back that probably cost him about 0.3 of a step. And his vault score was 15.455. It was at this point afterward that Koi Young went and did his handspring Randy, and he actually stuck this vault. It was incredible. So the handspring Randy is tied for the second most difficult vault of the competition at a 5.6. Riley Luce, another one of the Stanford gymnasts, also performed a handspring Randy, and that vault moved him into the top 8 in the all-around. Olympian Shane Wiskus started his bid for the second world team, and he started strong with a Kazamatsu 1.5 in the first rotation. But in the second rotation, things started to go awry. So he went to parallel bars, and his routine looked really good until he went for the dismount, and he under-rotated his double front dismount, and he ended up falling. And he looked actually quite surprised to have fallen on the dismount, so I'm not sure if he was going for a stick, but this definitely sort of sent his night tumbling for the next couple of rotations. On the far side of the arena, Patrick Hoops of the Air Force Academy put in a stellar performance on pommel horse, which would leave him in second place for the rest of the competition. Donnell Wittenberg made his way through pommel horse, which has not historically been his strongest event, but he did not fall, and so that set him up well for the all-around. So at the end of the second rotation, Curran Phillips was in the top of the all-around standings, but he was not actually going to be doing the all-around. He was only doing 3 events, so we'll see him sort of drop off in a couple of rotations. And then Asher Hong was second, followed by Fred Richard, Koi Young, and Yul Moldauer. In the third rotation, we saw Cameron Nelson go to vault, and he was the only gymnast of the night to perform 2 vaults, meaning he is at the top of the vault standing. So for those of you who are new to the sport, to win a vault medal in international competition, you do have to perform 2 different vaults from 2 different families. So we may only see 1 or 2 gymnasts actually be eligible for a vault medal here at the US Gymnastics Championships. While there were good performances going on parallel bars, high bar was a bit of a mess. So it had been really unkind to 2 gymnasts who I would say are in contention for that world team, and that's Shane Wiskus and Curran Phillips. So Shane Wiskus took a fall on his Cassina, and Curran Phillips really had one of the strangest mistakes I've ever seen on high bar. So he was going for his Takemoto skill, which is a stooping element under the bar, and instead of stooping beneath the bar, he caught his foot, meaning he ended up having to take an extra rotation, and then he didn't really have momentum when he tried to do the half out of it, and he was quite late, so he would have gotten deducted for that as well. So both athletes will really need to hit high bar on day 2, as it is a very important apparatus in their bid for international competition. Paul Judah was able to redeem his earlier mistakes from high bar with a strong performance on pommel horse, and his routine is performed almost entirely in flare, which is very exciting for the crowd. And he ended up having the 3rd highest score of the night and the highest of the all-arounders. So there were 2 gymnasts who ended up with higher score, but they specialize in pommel horse alone. During the 3rd rotation, we also saw Donnell Wittenberg on one of his standout events, which is still rings. He opened with a beautiful Maltese de planche, followed by an Azarian iron cross, and he capped off his routine with a layout full in that he was able to stick, and he ended up leading the standings for still rings after night 1. So at the end of the 3rd rotation, the all-around standings were Asher, Colt, Koi, Fred, and Riley Luce. Heading into the 4th rotation, we had seen 3 different gymnasts leading the all-around. So first it was Yul Moldauer, and then it was Curran Phillips, and then now Asher Hong. And there were certainly some questions as to if Asher could maintain this lead as he was heading to high bar, which has historically been one of his weaker events. However, he has improved dramatically, and he ended up with an 8.0 E-score. So his 13.4 was actually in the top 10 of all high bar routines for night 1, and this routine allowed him to keep the lead. World vault medalist Donnell Wittenberg continued to compete his less difficult vault, so we certainly know he is capable of doing one of those 6.0 vaults, but instead here he chose to stick with the Kazamatsu 1.5, which is valued at a 5.2, and he performed the vault very well, just had a small hop on the landing, and his total score was 14.550. We also saw Josh Carnes on vault here. So he recently upgraded to the cause double, which he debuted at the University Games in Chengdu, China. And he ended up scoring a 14.152. The vault right now is newer to him and it is a bit messy in the air, but once he cleans it up, it will be a really valuable asset for future international team assignments. I don't think Carnes is going to be challenging for a spot on the world's team this year, but he is certainly one that you want to be watching heading into 2024. Like Paul Juda, Yul Moldauer's pommel horse routine utilizes a lot of different flare work, which is always a favorite for the crowd, and his 14.229 was one of 4 routines to crack 14, and it was the second highest pommel horse score among all-arounders. So after 4 rotations, Asher Hong maintained his lead, followed by Fred Richard, Yul Moldauer, Donnell Wittenberg, and Koi Young. Coming into the competition, we knew that Asher Hong was going to be a favorite for the all-around title because he came in with over a point more difficulty than any of the other competitors, and he was going to gather a lot of bonus specifically due to his vault. And in this 5th rotation, this is really where Asher had to rely on his over 1 point of difficulty because he did end up falling, and a fall is a full point, and this put him in danger of being overtaken in the standings. Fred Richard went to vault, and his vault was okay. He struggled on his Roche, which is a handspring double front. He had struggled with this at the University Games as well, and it's not really up to his standards, which he told the media after the competition. This vault is not what he has historically performed. Earlier this year and during the NCAA season, he was performing a cause 1.5, which has the exact same difficulty as the handspring double front. So that may be a better option moving forward until he is able to upgrade that Roche to a Dragulescu like he is intending. In the 5th rotation, we finally got to see world champion Steven Nedorosik, and he actually opened his routine with a skill that's named after one of his coaches, Sam Mikulik. And he did perform the upgraded Busanari, which is the traveling handstand element, and that was really good. He was clean through his G-flop element, but his form was not as sharp as it usually is on his Son and Bazugo, so those are the one-hand skills on one pommel. And the former Penn State gymnast took the highest score of the night with a 15.457 on pommel horse. Koi Young was excellent on floor. He stuck his opening connection of front full to front double tuck, as well as his dismount, and his 14.650 was the highest floor score of the night. Paul Juda played it safe on vault. We saw him debut a Yurchenko double pike at the US Classic a few weeks ago, but this time he ended up going with his cause 1.5. So his difficulty went from 5.6 to 5.2, and he ended up scoring a 14.6. So following 5 rotations, Asher maintained the lead, and then it was Yul Moldauer, Koi Young, Paul Juda, Fred Richard, and Donnell Wittenberg. And now going into the final rotation, everyone was sort of on their toes wondering who is going to end the night in the lead, and this was certainly a very critical rotation for both Fred and Asher. So Asher was going to pommel horse, where he has sometimes been inconsistent, but not tonight. Truly the only question mark came during his dismount, where he didn't compete his intended difficulty, but otherwise he was able to go through pretty cleanly. Fred, on the other hand, ended up struggling on his parallel bars routine, specifically on the Stutz element. He was offline, and he ended up needing to walk his hand several times, which cost him the lead at the end of night 1, although he did end strong with a double front dismount. Yul did as Yul always does on vault, his cause 1.5. While it isn't as difficult as some of the other vaults in the competition, he executes it near perfect every time, and this was no exception. It was a beautiful vault. So with that end, Asher ended the day in first, followed by Yul and Fred, but less than 0.2 separate the top 3, which is going to make Saturday's competition really, really exciting to watch. Following the competition, we were able to speak with the top 3 athletes in the all-around, Asher Hong, Yul Moldauer, and Fred Richard. And when asked about his preparation for the meet, Moldauer talked about his approach and viewing this championships not only as national championships, but also as world trials. And he said, quote, "At the end of the day, I don't want to be left out. I'm going to make sure that I put myself in a position to be talked about. I want to make the world's team, and that's my main focus. I'm calling this world trials and not US championships. So after being left off the World Championships team, Moldauer has now positioned himself well to achieve his goal. The pair of 19-year-olds both spoke of being happy with their performances and mentioned small things to tweak and work on. For Asher, it was his floor routine, and for Fred, it was his vault. So the athletes will return in competition on Saturday, August 26th. Following the competition, we will know who is on the national team, and they will also be naming the World and Pan American Games team. So make sure to follow up on that. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to my website, Neutral Deductions. You get free weekly updates on what's happening in men's gymnastics. And if you would, go ahead, like and subscribe here on this video. It really does help us out. So I'll see you next time.